Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Meat Made, and today we are painting this. So if you want to know how I did it, stick around. So last week I showed you how I painted the base of this model, and now I am going to actually be painting the full figure now, the most exciting part. And if you're interested in where I got this model, I'll go ahead and put some links below, but I got this from an amazing Patreon that I follow from LA Figures. He makes some amazing models, and it's well worth the investment every single month to get some models looking like this. So let's go ahead, jump to the table, and get started on this Leo. So how I'm going to paint Leonardo is I'm going to do a lot of it with dry brush, and just to kind of give you an overview of how I'm going to do a lot of this dry brush is I have a few things that I haven't mentioned yet. So the first thing is this texture board, and I've actually laser cut this board myself because this whole concept I have actually gotten from the artist Opus, and I'll put a link to his channel in the description below because he does a lot of dry brush, and the dry brush I'm actually going to be using on this are his actual dry brushes. They are fantastic quality dry brushes, and they're round brushes. But the whole concept of this is this. First, you actually wet your dry brush, and this is a sponge that I've got just a little bit damp to where you can see a little bit of a glisten on your finger if you touch it. It's not soaking wet, but you get your dry brush wet, just a little bit. You get it damp. Then you take a little bit of paint on your texture board, and you just drag the paint on it. After that, then you use your texture board to remove that paint. And you could use any kind of rough surface as well, even like a cardboard or something like that if you had to. But the way I've designed my texture board is I have different areas because this is actually engraved. So if I want to remove a little bit, I use this, and if I want to remove a lot, I use this. And that texture actually removes the actual paint from your brush. And this is to help prevent wasting paper towels, because the method I used to use was using paper towels. But using paper towels, it actually dries out the paint on your brush. But using paper towels doesn't give you the same results as using a texture board, because I can control the amount of paint coming off of my brush. Sometimes I want more, sometimes I want less. And for this, I'm going to be going back and forth. Then once you've actually started painting and you're not getting anything off of your actual brush anymore, you can come back and just dab it onto the sponge, and that will kind of rehydrate some of the paint so you can keep dry brushing and with the same amount of paint still on your brush. So I'm going to go ahead and start going through this process. And what I'm going to be using is this dark green, and this dark green is going to be the base layer for all of my skin. And the reason why I'm not actually like putting all of this together is because I'm going to do an even coloring on all of this, just an even shading. So where there's not going to be a direct light source to where it's darker over here versus over here. And I want this to be a really even paint job, so it doesn't matter to me if this is attached or not. And it being unattached, I have a lot easier access to get in certain areas versus it would be attached, then I'm trying to get in here, and even when I'm painting the belt. So I'm going to go ahead and take this darker green from Game Color, and this is going to be the base of Leonardo. So I'm just going to apply a little bit here to my texture board, and now I'm taking the large dry brush I have, and I'm just going to start dragging it away to get some of that paint on the brush. And then you can see there, it's on there. And now I'm going to be just dragging it across to be able to get it evenly distributed on the bristles. And then I'm just going to test it, and it's good. And all I'm going to be doing for this first base is I'm not concerned with anything on this model except his skin. So his skin is what I'm going to be starting to paint first, and then I'm going to go back and use some other methods to paint the different colors. But for the most part,
I'm going to be dry brushing his skin, his soft shell, and his hard shell. That is going to be 100% dry brush. The rest of this model, like his bandages and elbow pads and belt, things like that, I'm going to be painting with a brush, but also be using some dry brush techniques. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is a stippling pattern, and that is me just getting the foundation of this turtle. So I'm just going to take this green and start stippling this green all over his skin. And I'm focusing on all of the areas of his skin, but around the edges and things like that, I'm not hitting it as hard. Then when I start to run out on paint on the brush, I come back and just drag away and just get it on the bristles, and then just do a quick test. And I don't care if this is actually a little more saturated than you would typically have for a dry brush. So once I've got the first coat done, then I'm just going to go back over it another time to get just a little more saturation on it. So now I have his entire skin based in this green, and it's kind of hard to tell on camera, but it is a really, really, really dark green. You can kind of tell from the belly to the arm. So now I'm going to take this sick green and start really dry brushing all of the skin and avoiding some of these really dark areas, like the cracks of the shell and, you know, some of the cracks of the muscles. All I'm going to do is, now I'm just kind of dragging my brush around to be able to get some of this green off. But I'm not washing it. So now I've got it, and I'm ready to just take some of this green paint, and I'm just dragging it to get enough on the brush, and I'm spinning my brush as I'm pulling away, so I don't just get it in one big glob. Then I'm going to go back and forth and remove some of that. Then I just use my hand to test because I don't want too much coming off. And there we go. And now I'm going to just start again and just be going back and forth and dry brushing this leg and get some of the color to show up on it. But the thing is the further I pull back on my brush, the more loose it'll be, and I don't have to worry about getting into some of those details I don't want. But when I want a little more control, I'm going to go in and grip up on the brush. And you can see how it's really starting to leave some of those shadows here, and then the higher areas are starting to get some of that color. So I'm just going to continue to do that and just really go over all of these areas. So what I'm doing is I go through and I'm just doing a regular dry brush going perpendicular to the grain. So like there's an indent here, and I've been going back and forth and just covering it with green. And I'm building layers. So I'm going to get a little more paint on my brush here. Then I'm going to get some of that paint off, check it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of do a circle because I want to fill in this dark line, but I don't want to fill it in a whole lot. I just want to darken it a bit. So you can see in the front here that it's not that black anymore. So I'm going to be doing the same thing to this back. Now I am just going to do some circles, and what it's doing is I've already built up this color here to make it brighter on the sides. Now I've got to just build up here while building these colors up even more. So I'm just kind of spinning it around in circles and still highlighting the big areas, but I'm letting it get into the cracks there. So you can see now it's got a little bit of a dark texture to it, but it's that green that I'm going for, because this is my secondary layer. I'm going to be probably going with two more different greens on top of this, and each time I'm getting lighter and lighter. So this dark green was kind of my base, so it's not just a straight black. And then now I'm doing this green over top of it. That way I can start building those shadows. And then the other thing is now that this is not giving me anything at all, but there's still paint on here and it's just dried. So I'm just going to take my sponge that's just a little bit wet, and I'm just going to tap it a couple times, and that's going to reactivate some of that paint. So now I can hit it again, and you can even see here I'm getting green on my hand. So I can start using this again with this reactivated paint. And I'm just going in circles to really get in some of those cracks where I don't want it black or this dark green, but I don't want it as bright as this green. So once the paint starts to leave the brush, that's when I want to really get this brush just damp again with just a little bit of water on it. And then I can start going into some of these areas and then getting it just a little bit brighter than this dark green. And really concentrating on some of these higher ridge areas, because I want them to get really bright green, but not yet. But I'm building the foundation because I've got a lighter color on top of this dark green, and then I'm going to get another lighter color on top of this green, and then so forth. And that's really going to start bringing in some of that realistic look. Because the shadows and the muscles aren't going to be just absolutely like a dark color. So I'm trying to just make sure I've got it even everywhere with this green. And so you can see we've got some darker tones. And I've still got a few areas that I still have to hit. And there you go, so you can see that. I'm just building up this paint to get more of a realistic tone. So you can see the legs here of how I've done that. So I'm just going to keep doing this on the entire model, and then we'll jump to once I've got everything done. Alright, so you can see here I've got everything dry brushed now with that green base tone. And I've got a little bit of the shading, you can still see some of the black. And now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next color. And now what I'm going to be using is this Goblin Green from Game Color. So I'm going to put some on my texture board here and take this guy apart. And now I'm going to be using the extra large dry brush. So I'm just going to pull away and drag out some paint and get it on the bristles. And get it off. And now this, I'm going to be doing it very lightly. And I'm going to be hitting the tops of the model. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the top ridges of the model. And as I'm doing this, I'm turning my brush just so I can get all of the paint off of the brush. And as you can see, I'm also using circles, so I'm not just going back and forth. So if there's certain areas that I want to hit a little harder, like the higher areas, like this calf muscle here, I'm actually hitting it with a circle pattern. And then when I'm not getting too much off, I'm actually dabbing it on my just very damp sponge.
And then that rehydrates the paint to where I can get more off. And you can see I'm really building this up. And I'm still leaving some of the darker areas, but I am going over them a little bit because I'm just slowly shading them. Because it's really about building it up and layering it. So you can see that this is the original, and now this tone is getting a little darker. So all of those shadows and stuff are still there, but I'm just lightening them up. And there we go. So now this is done. Alright, so moving on. Getting some more paint on my brush. Going to my texture board, brushing it off. And this, I want the head a little bit brighter and the top of the nose. So I'm going to hit that a little harder than I typically would everywhere else. Because I want the crown a brighter color. And there you go, you can see that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of the green, and then we'll go to the next step. Alright, now I'm going to be using this Escorpina green from Game Color. Now this is the final green, so I'm going to put some down here. And I'm still using the big brush, and I'm not cleaning it, so I'm just going to be getting some on my brush. Using the texture board, get it all off. Then just doing a little test on my hand to make sure that too much isn't coming off. And now I am just going to be focusing on the ridges of this because I want the highlights to really start to pop. So I'm just going to be loosely holding my brush and kind of going over those ridges. To really just give some highlight to it. And there you go, you can see that. So let's get a comparison. So you can see how we're really getting a lot of definition and some good shading to that. And the areas that I'm really focusing on are those big smooth areas. And when my brush isn't giving me any more paint, I'm just going to kind of tap it on my brush just to give a little bit of moisture back to it. And keep going. And I go over the same area a few times just to keep building up that bright green. And then the same thing, I'm going to be hitting this nose and the top of the head just a little bit harder than I have everywhere else because I just want this to be a little bit brighter here. And there we go. So now I'm just going to go ahead and get the rest of the green skin. All right, there we go. So now we have his skin tone completely done and all just using dry brush. And you can see we've got some really great definition in the muscles with all of that different green layering we did. So now the next thing I'm going to be doing is his shell. So let's take this apart and we're going to be working on that. And first what I'm going to do is, because of all of the dry brush that we got on the shell, I'm going to go ahead and paint the shell black again so we have the same foundation that we had with the green.
So here I go. And I'm just going to be using some Apple Barrel Black to cover up these areas. So I've got everything painted black that is not skin now, and instead of just doing the shell, I went ahead and did everything since I already had the paint out, and now he is ready for his shell. But even just black, man, that skin is popping and it looks great. So here we go. So to keep this dark theme that I've got going on, because I want him a little gritty, I am not going to do a complete base coat of a brown. What I'm going to do is do his shell 100% dry brush without any stippling. So first I need to mask off these areas where his skin is actually touching the shell. That way I don't get any of the brown over on the green of the skin. Since we've already done so much work, let's not ruin that work. Okay, so now I've got him all masked out with the shell, and I'm going to be using this oak brown from the Army Painters. And then I'm also going to be using my extra large dry brush, and I honestly, all I did was just try to get all of the paint out of this on my texture board. But now I'm just going to add this brown right to it. And now I'm just going to do kind of a heavy dry brush on here. Alright, so you can see that now I've got this nice dry brush on the shell, and all I'm going to do is do some highlighting with this earth brown from Game Color. And this is going to be a lot of on the edges, so I'm just kind of dragging along on the edges to get some highlighting on those edges of his shell. Now I'm holding back and just kind of doing a loose fan just to get a little of those ridges. And there we go. It's pretty simple. Just using two tones and all dry brush, and it gives it enough kind of definition to that. So the masking tape is ready to come off, and you can see already he is definitely coming to life. So now we're ready for the soft shell, and I'm going to be doing the same thing. I'm going to take my masking tape and I'm going to mask off the skin so I don't accidentally get the paint on there. And I'm just using blue painter's tape. Now I'm actually going to start with that same color that I did the top coat on, and I'm just going to do a nice dry brush on there. And for this first base, I'm actually applying it a lot heavier than I normally would, because this is just the base color. Alright, so now I'm going to use this desert yellow, and I'm just going to be lightly going over the entire thing. Alright, now I'm going to use this honeycomb, and it's just a little bit lighter. So I'm basically just building up on lighter tones. Ooh. And that squirted out way too much. And now this is, I'm just going a lot lighter and just hitting some of those ridged areas.
And there we go. And that was all I'm really wanting to do to that. So I'm going to go ahead and we can take the tape off now. And there you can see we've got our soft shell and hard shell done. Now, the one thing I am going to do is I'm going to take a brush and get some of this dark oak again. Get a little water on my brush and thin this out a little. And I'm just lightly going to hit some of these areas that are black. Just because I want a little bit of color there, but I do not want it to be that highlighted yellow. So it's almost like it's a little bit of a rim. And I'm using it really watered down and just barely hitting it to give it more of a glaze. And there we go. Just a little dark in between there, a little dark brown, because I still want some of that black, but I want just like a brownish tint to it. Now we're done with that. The next thing I'm going to have to do is I got to go back over these areas and make the straps all black again. And then I am going to be ready to start painting all of these leather straps. So let me go ahead and paint these, and then we'll come right back to the next step. Alright, so now I've got the belt and everything painted black again, and now I am going to do my base color of my leather. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take this burnt umber. It's a super dark brown, and I'm going to use that as my base tone for my leather. So I'm going to go ahead and get some of this paint and water it down and start just covering everything that is going to be leather. And that also includes the elbow pads and knee pads, as well as these little pouches that go on his belt right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just get everything coated in this burnt umber. So one thing to mention while I'm doing this, I am just doing a very thin coat because I still want some of that black to show through. The goal is not complete coverage. The goal is just to get a very dark brown tone on this. But if more paint gets on in certain areas and it's a little more dark, that is not a problem. So as I was painting this, I realized that all I'm really going to do is I'm going to take this same brown and go around all of these bandages, because I think I want the same base tone, but the pads and things I'm going to be doing something different to make them look more like leather. But when it comes to like gauzes and bandages, I want a dark base tone, because then I'm going to start building it up to lighter tones. So I'm going to go ahead and paint the rest of this, and then we'll come back when everything is nice and brown. So now I've got every bandage in this burnt umber, and also all of his straps. I'm going to take this nutmeg from Apple Barrel and put a little bit on my texture board. So I'm going to use this small Army Painter dry brush to get the leather. So I'm just drawing a little bit of paint in the bristles and rubbing some of it off, and then trying to be as controlled as I can when it comes to adding on the dry brush, because I do not want to get it on any of the green or anywhere else, honestly, just the belt. And the thing when doing leather, you kind of want to not make an even pattern. Like, you want to hit some areas a little harder and some other areas just a little bit less. Because leather can be worn, and you just don't want to have it all the same tone when dry brushing. So you can see on the top ridge I'm hitting it just a little bit harder, and in some of these other areas in comparison to just this dark right here you can see. So, and I'm going to keep hitting it in these certain areas to really build up this lighter brown. Okay, so there's the first pass of the leather. And now I'm going to do the same thing on all of the pads for the knee and elbows. Alright, and the last pass for the leather, I use a raw sienna, just because it's got a lot of orange in it, and it just kind of highlights that leather. So I'm just going to put a little bit down, and using the same brush, I'm just drawing it in and getting some of that off. And this is going to be just really light highlighting. I'm just going to barely use it on certain areas. And it's very subtle, but you can see how I've just added it on the edges, and it gives a little more of a worn orange kind of look to it. So you just kind of hit it on one side, and you can see how it just gives a nice leathery kind of look to it. So let me do it on the belt. And I'm really going to just be focusing on a lot of the edges here. There, you can see how that really starts to pop out. There we go. So you can see the front now, that leather, in comparison to the back. You're really just using this lighter color just to get those highlights, and you want to focus on the areas that you think would be the most worn. And there you can see that. So I've done this area over the shoulder and the strap. Alright, so I'm just going to continue and do the rest of this, and then we will jump to the bandages after I'm done here. Okay, so now I have the leather straps all painted, and also the pouches and the front of the knee pads. Now what I'm going to do is start on these bandages that are wrapped around. So I'm going to be taking this khaki from Game Color, then take my dry brush and do the exact same thing. I'm just drawing it. I've already cleaned my dry brush and dried it. The big key here is you pull it onto the sides of your bristles, and then what you do is then you can actually do the drawing. And if you notice, I'm twisting as I'm pulling away. Then I just do a little test to see what's showing up on my brush, and that's a good tone right there. Then we'll start with an ankle right here, and all I'm going to do is just do a light brushing. Directly on it. So you can see how that's going to start to look like a bandage. And I'm being very careful about the edges where the skin is.
So now I'm just going to go through and get all of these gauze looking bandages, and I'm going to be doing something a little different for the back part. I went ahead and did all of the black edging on the knee pads, and if you see here, and also if you see, I did some of the stitching, but the knee pads now are all black, and I went ahead over the dark brown, I did a black dry brush. So it's got a little bit of a brown tone to it, but I wanted it to be almost like a leather strap to give a little bit of a difference between the bandages and the actual knee pads and elbow pads. But as you can see, it gives it a really nice, grungy kind of look to it. And I also like the contrasting pop between like the leather elbow pads and knee pads. Then I also went through and I did some of the detailing in the black since I already had it. I did the little straps right there. And then also this kind of connection extension strap, I painted that a nice black. So we are getting close to being done. So the only things left I really have is the swords, some of the detailing on the straps, and his mask. Then also, I've also got his sword sheaths that go on his back. So I've got to paint that as well. So now I'm going to go ahead and start working on the swords and some of the detailing on the belt itself.
Hold up real quick. I just want to say thank you. Thank you to all of these amazing people for supporting me on Patreon this month. If you want to be like these awesome people, you will get exclusive access to my private Discord channel where we talk about 3D printing, painting 3D prints, and honestly sharing some of our failures and trying to figure out how to not make them fail. And you'll also get access to my behind the scenes content of some of the projects that I'm working on that I don't put on YouTube. And you'll have the opportunity to vote on some of the videos that I make each month. This video right here is one of those videos. If you're interested, I'll have the link below for you. Other than that, let's get back to this video.
So the swords themselves with these wraps, I don't want to use the exact same tone that I did with the bandages. They are a wrap, but I want to kind of go with a darker wrap because I don't want to keep, making this brighter and brighter. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm actually going to take a gray. I'm going to go ahead and take this cold gray, and I'm going to do just a very light dry brush because I really want these swords to be kind of dark and gritty. And then I'm also going to paint the hilt as well with this gray. And I'm going to be using my small dry brush. And I'm just lightly hitting it, just to give a little bit of contrast. And there you go. So you can see I've got a nice little tone there, just as a little bit of contrast. Alright, so I'm just going to take a brush with this same gray and start painting the hilt. Alright, so now I'm going to take some of this gunmetal from Game Color, and it is a metallic paint. So I'm going to be just using just a tiny bit, and that is what I'm going to be doing all of these little rivets on his belt, and I'm also going to do the ring right here, the connection ring. And there we go. And now just the little clasps here as well. And there we go. So now I'm going to take my metallic rub-ons that I have and use those to get the swords looking like steel. But the other thing I'm going to be doing is also applying it to the hilt too, to have just a little bit of a metallic look to that, so it's just not this flat gray. So I'm going to go ahead, get some on my brush, and just start applying it. And you can already see it really gives a nice metallic look. You can see that versus that. And there we go. So we've got a nice metallic, and if you see also, now the hilt has a little bit of a glisten to it as well to give it that nice metal look. Alright, and we'll do the next sword. And there we go. Alright, done with the swords. Alright, so now I'm going to do the sheaths of the swords, and I'm going to be using this oak brown from the Army Painter. And I'm just going to be using my small dry brush and just dry brushing this brown. And I'm applying it pretty heavy as well, because I really want this to be the base, but I want some of that black to kind of shine through on some of those cracks. Alright, now I'm going to take this earth tone from Game Color and just a tiny bit here and mix that into my brush and get that off really well. And then I'm just going to do a very light dry brush to just bring out some of those ridges and let that grain really pop. And you can see how that grain is looking really nice versus the bottom here. So now I have that wood looking really good, and we can look at even the contrast between the two. Alright, so now I'm going to paint the rope here, and what I'm going to use is this desert yellow. So I'm just going to put a little bit on my texture board here and just paint it right off of that. I guess the big thing to realize here is when you're like working with certain colors and you have the base color that you're wanting, you don't always have to get complete coverage. So like I was just like scrubbing this back and forth and just trying to get it highlighted. And I'm not fully getting complete coverage because I wanted that dark to kind of show through. Alright, so I'm going to use this Barbarian Flesh for his nails, at least the first base color. And this is a Game Air color, so it's meant for airbrush, so it's already pretty thin. So I'm just going to put a little dot, and I'm going to use this to paint these nails. So I'm going to take this Citadel Shade Null Oil, and I'm actually going to do a little bit of a wash on the actual toenails. And I'm really trying to focus all of it on the cuticles. So more on the back I'm trying to get it, and along the edges. So you can see how that shading is really at the cuticles, and then I kind of drew it out with my brush while cleaning my brush. So I would bring it back, clean my brush, and then just start wiping away here. And that's how I got that dirtier kind of look. Alright, so we're ready to move on to one of the last things, and that is the mask. So first I'm going to take care of his eyes and paint around them instead of painting the mask and then getting the eyes done. So I'm going to use this dead white, and I'm just going to fill in his eyes completely with that. Okay, so for the next thing, I'm going to be using this Null Oil again. So I'm going to fill in the eye with that now that this is all white, and then I'm going to use this Q-tip and just kind of dab it so it'll stay on the edges. So here we go. I'll show you here. So we get that. Then I'm just gonna slightly dab it. And you can see how it gives that shadowy look. And there we go. Just like that. So same thing over here. Then I'm just going to dab it to reveal some of that white. And there we go. So now we've got that nice shade. Now I'm going to let that dry 100%. and once it's dry, we're going to start on this blue mask. Okay, for the first layer of the mask, I am going to be using this Night Blue from Game Color. And all I'm going to do is just get a nice even coat everywhere on it. Alright, so now I'm going to use this ultramarine blue and put a little on my texture board. And I'm using this small dry brush. And I'm going to dry brush this blue over top of this dark blue. Okay, so now I'm going to take the blue and do the same thing on the mask, but I'm going to be very careful and not try to disturb any of the green. So let's put it in, and there we go.
So I am super happy with how this entire model turned out. And you saw all the steps that it took. And it wasn't hard. It was just a lot of steps, one on top of another. Finding the right colors and also using the right techniques of dry brush. And I've also shown you some of the different techniques when it comes to using a makeup brush or a dry brush. Yeah. But there's different ways you can use them. You don't always have to just use the dry brush technique, but the stippling technique is something that I use a lot for dry brushes. Yes, that's right. Thanks a lot for watching. If you have any questions, leave them below for me. Other than that, I wish you a great day, and I will see you in that next video.